my favorite movies that are the most like, oh my God, I want to do that are always like Ex Machina, Ready Player One, that new Matrix movie blew my mind, AI, like all the Marvel films, all of the DC films, like it's all like that to me. I will never get my fill of that.
Big Nate comes out on February 17th on Paramount Plus. So I want to ask you this first. What made you want to be part of this project?
Well, our wonderful creators came to me at the top of 2020, and they said, do you know about this property? Do you know how beloved it is? Would you look into it? And if you respond to it, would you be interested in playing Ellen? And I hadn't heard of it until suddenly it was like, it was like under my bed and it was like on the top of my ceiling. I was like, oh, has this always been here? Like Big Nate is everywhere and people love it. And it's got such a following and such a devotion that I was kind of shocked that I hadn't heard of it, but also not really, because I'm very, very off the grid and unplugged in a bad way. But I was so excited because in my opinion, these days, there's so much being created that like the best stuff is only ever the fan chosen things. Like it's never like what you are constantly hearing about being publicized. It's always grassroots. It's like it springs out of nowhere to you. And like suddenly it's been around for forever. So I was really, really excited to be a part of something that has such a passionate fan base.
Absolutely. And you play Ellen White, who's the older sister of Nate. Were you similar to her in any way when you were growing up, when we were attending high school?
Not at all. Honestly, I think that like Ellen is very put together. Ellen is very ambitious and very organized. And I think the only things that Ellen and I have in common are kind of like the parts of Ellen that are actually just infused with me. Like a lot of Ellen throughout the season changes from being like what I thought Ellen was going to be. And then you like slowly hear her get more and more like unhinged and like kind of wild. And just the producers really gave me a lot of creative liberties. I mean, every character in the show is really wild and really genuinely like funny in a way that I feel like is like adults respond to. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not curated anyway. It's like quite wild and quite like human hilarity. And so in that way, I relate to Ellen, but like in a character description, we're very dissimilar.
Of course. And it's funny that you mentioned how all these characters are wild, because when I watched some of the episodes, I definitely noticed how over the top they are. So who would you say would be the wildest character of the group?
Nate, definitely Nate. But I think it's like, it was one of those things where like, as we were creating and I was realizing kind of we were getting away with, I feel like, and this is not directed towards like any cartoon in particular. I just feel like trending wise, cartoons and children's media is like more and more tame. I think because just everything is being more and more like sterilized, because we're all like, what's the right way to do things? And everybody's very scared about like stepping on toes. But I think that the reason why Big Nate is an exception to that is because it started out on a different medium. So it's not like being crafted for audiences from like a sort of like a, you know, Suits in an office being like, what do children like? And it's like, it feels like robots like made it. It's like, how could you be so fingers off the pulse? But because it's so beloved by real humans, it's such a real human show. And I think that like, that's why, you know, we're able to get away with so many kind of like wild things on this show, and how above and beyond it is because it's, we're not scared. Like the creators are getting away with wild stuff. These storylines are wacky. And so I think that like, for me, watching the character of Nate taps me into like something of like the cartoons when I was really, really little, you know, like the kind of OG stuff before there was really the internet, even like before that was like really like a forum of like terrifying things. So.
And do you think that's the biggest thing that stands out with Big Nate because of, you know, as you mentioned, everything being so tame? Do you think that's the biggest thing that stands out when it comes to other Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus animated series?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't compare it to anything, mostly because I don't know, you know, it's like I'm
yeah, right.
But I would say that like on its own, the things that feel special to me about Big Nate, other than the fact that it's like, it does feel very reminiscent of, and like a love letter to that kind of classic style of writing and animation. I also think that what is really kind of arresting about it are the visuals, because I didn't get to see the visuals until much later. And obviously something that is such a quintessential part of the comics is this kind of 2D style in which these characters are drawn, but then bringing it in with the CGI of the animation. And then the brilliant choice that the animators made to use, and I don't even understand. This is like me looking at like a rocket. I'm like, how do you like, I just don't, it's like the same. I'm like, a dead language. They light it, not with that artificial cartoon lighting where everything has the same light everywhere, but they light it from real light sources, which sounds like maybe it wouldn't make such a big impact, but it was the very first thing I noticed. I was like, are those flecks of dust in the sun streams coming in from the window from the backyard? And they're like, I'm like the hair, the individual strands, the hair is stunning. So it's a very interesting amalgamation of things. I think it's very different just in nature.
No doubt about it. And as I mentioned, you voiced Ellen White, but you've also done some voiceover work in the past, specifically Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen, and the Ultimate Spider-Man versus Sinister Six series. With everything going on with the Marvel Cinematic Universe now, would you be up for playing a live action Spider-Gwen if that opportunity ever came up?
Yeah. It'd be amazing if I was like, no. Next question.
No.
I think that's the dream. I mean, my favorite genre is something that I finally have. Netflix calls it slick. That's the genre, because it's not just necessarily action or sci-fi or futurism, but it's the nexus of all three of those things. So all of my favorite movies are like my favorite movies that are like the most influential to me. Obviously, my favorite movie is Pan's Labyrinth, but my favorite movies that are the most like, oh my God, I want to do that, are always like Ex Machina, Ready Player One, that new Matrix movie blew my mind, AI, like all the Marvel films, all of the DC films, like it's all like that to me. I will never get my fill of that. Even if it's something that I'm like, not like, it's not exactly what it's like, that to me feeds my soul in a new way that is like nothing else does it. So I think being a part of that kind of like action, futurism, heightened reality world is like my bread and butter for sure.
Oh, of course. And one of your future projects, you're doing a live action show of the Powerpuff Girls. I think it's called Powerpuff. How's that been? What information can you give us now? And how has it been reuniting with Chloe Bennett, who you worked on in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
So Powerpuff was and is really fun. It's a huge property, obviously. And I was very intrigued by their treatment of it. Obviously, we have Diablo Cody, who is a predominantly cult, indie film writer who has this very off the wall, kind of like inappropriate, like comedy especially for something through this lens, which was like a really interesting crossover that I was very switched on by. And then, it's a superhero property, but with this kind of like weird, it's not straight up superhero, right? Like it's not like just the Flash. It's like, it's got a sort of a strange off kilter. Even the cartoon when I was younger, I watched it back obviously recently, and it's like, this is wild that you guys were allowed to get away with this. Like down to like the character of him and like the professor. It's like, it's really kind of off the wall stuff. So bringing that into a real life world and then putting Diablo Cody at the helm and then putting the girls in their mid-20s and Bubbles is, I can't give too much away. I'm talking about it.
Of course.
It was like so fun to be like, I have like shots on my phone that I wish I could show you that were like crazy expensive crane shots of like tiny me and like Bubbles lore and my stupid pigtails and like ice breath from like 9 stories away with like the perspective of some massive machine monster, like that is just my dream. And so right now we're working on reworking the pilot and sort of making it into our dream project before we go back in and like officially go on the series. But oh my God, it's just, so.
That's awesome. Looking forward to it. That's it for me, Dub. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Congratulations on Big Nate and continued success to you.